Hello. Okay, so today I'm talking about the book review that I did for this class. So I read the book Runaway Slaves, Rebels on the Plantation by John Hope Franklin and Lauren Schweninger. I hope I'm saying that right. Here's a picture of the book. I have the Kindle version. I hope you can see that. And just to prove that I actually have the book. um, so yeah, that's the book that I read. And this basically highlights the relationship between like slave owners and their runaway slaves. And it basically talks about what happened to slaves. That slaves actually, often we were taught that slaves didn't run away and that, slavery wasn't really that bad of a thing, but in reality slavery was terrible, and this book dives into different slave stories, the harsh realities that they faced, and the consequences for running away, and that oftentimes if a slave got a chance to run away, they would, and they rebelled in every way possible. And in addition to that, it also talks about how, slave owners would do everything they could to keep slaves from running away, as well as what they would do to try to catch those slaves that were running away. So that's essentially what the story is about. Now, and just to make sure that I say this right, I read this entire book cover to cover, every word on every page. So, would I recommend this book? Yes, I would. There's parts of it that I liked and parts that I didn't. I really liked the idea that it dove into, the different, like, it was the real raw truth of what happened to slaves, the harsh realities that they faced every day, the racial violence, you know, how they fled, like where they fled to, how they fled, all those things. I really liked that the book highlighted that and it didn't sugarcoat anything, because a lot of times, like, what, for me personally, what I was taught in school was sugarcoated, I feel, and was very glazed over. So I really felt like I didn't really get to dive into what slavery actually is and what it means and what slaves actually endured. But reading this book really helped me to understand what they did endure, and that it really was terrible, and that they were risking their lives just by thinking of running away, much less actually doing it. And if they got caught, what happened to them, and how these slaves really challenged, this the government that we had, where white people who were slave owners were really really scared to of runaway slaves, and it really scared them, the idea of slaves were thinking of running away, and just the measures that they took to try to keep them from running away, and the harsh punishment that these people thought of. It's just really very it was like a reality check, I guess, for me, because I didn't realize that I knew it was terrible, but when you read the book and really read these real accounts of stories of slaves, it really makes it real. And I was also surprised to see that slaves often resisted. And I think that it's really good for teachers to know that for their students. So yes, I would recommend this book. I think it's important to read it, and for teachers to be able to know that. That way you can relay that knowledge to your students and know what really happened. Because if you're a K-6 teacher, or even a 6 through 12, you're going to be talking about slavery at some point. And that's a very big, standard that you have to discuss in school. So it's important that you know the truth about what happened, and not just some sugar-coated history about slavery. So I think that's very important to know. So I'd recommend you read it, but I just wish that it had like a lot of different stories, which I think is good to have, a variety of stories, but I felt like it was very just choppy and all over the place, and it was hard for me to be able to follow, like, wait, does this go to this story, or is this a different story? So I wish that it could have been more organized, maybe have highlighted a few stories rather than a ton of different stories, and really dove into those versus it being kind of all over the place. But as far as the chapters, everything was laid out really well, I felt. But I would definitely recommend it. I think everybody should read it, or read something, similar to this, some sort of book that gives an account of real lives of real slaves. So I would definitely recommend it for sure. Okay, so since this book was, based around slavery, I think that it would be perfect to incorporate a lesson plan based around slavery, obviously, but I think it would be a good idea to talk about the Underground Railroad because there's also a lot of children's literature that you can include in a lesson plan like this too. Obviously, I won't be, introducing the book that I read, but that will help me to have the knowledge that I need to know in order to teach this lesson. It will help me to give, students real life examples of how slaves were treated and the things that they did to run away. And the Underground Railroad, I felt like, was a perfect opportunity for me to display that knowledge and to teach children about it. So, first and foremost, the way that I've got my notes over here, but the way that I plan to incorporate like a lesson plan with this is I've got them solving riddles in the beginning just to get them engaged and, kind of wondering what's going on. But essentially, there were a lot of hidden messages and things in the Underground Railroad, and just helping them to, get engaged with that and also tie that into the lesson. And I've got a lot of games that I want them to play. They're going to create their own like freedom quilt, which is a lot of the ways that slaves communicated during that time period as well, to help them know where to travel to or what to bring, things of that nature. And in addition to this, they're going to compare and contrast the life of, a free slave or a white person versus, the life of a slave or a person of color back then, and just compare and contrast their rights and their lives and their education and things like that to really understand the difference between uh, the two sets of people, as well as be able to make connections to the Underground Railroad topic within itself. And of course, there will be a lot of, I'll have to give a lot of instruction to the students. And I think it would be good to have a lot of discussion between me and the students, as well as with them and their peers, like, how did you feel solving the riddles? How did you feel not knowing your next step? Things like that will help them make deep connections to the Underground Railroad. But also, I plan to like let them listen to music that was sung back then. And also, there's a really cool virtual tour that I found from Bellefonte Art Museum. Yes, that's right. Bellefonte Art Museum. And they have a virtual tour of a house that was used during the Underground Railroad. And there's also a lot of other virtual tours that you can show students that were houses or places that people stayed at during this time. And I think that's a great way to really explain this concept to students, and you can talk about different facts and things. So those are things that I plan to use throughout this lesson plan. And also, obviously I have a variety of formative assessments that I plan to use, but this is also a piece of literature that I have that I want to use in the lesson plan. This is called Henry's Freedom Box. And I recommend everybody have this book in their classroom because it's really, really good. But this is a book specifically about the Underground Railroad and how Henry, the different things that he went through as a slave and how he planned his escape during this time. So I think that's a great piece of children's literature that you can use during the lesson and that students can dive into and use to really make those connections, not only to the Underground Railroad, but to slavery, and just to be able to have, text to text connections, text to world connections, and be able to apply this lesson plan across different subjects. So that's basically how I plan to use the knowledge that I've gained from reading this book in the lesson plan that is centered around slavery. And hopefully that will help me to be able to teach students about slavery the proper way. And that way I have a lot of truth and just really important knowledge that I can relay to the students in this lesson plan. So yeah, that is all. Thanks.